Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Paul. I'd just like to say thank you to Paul, Connor, Claire, and everybody at ClearChoice for inviting me to speak to you today. I won't thank you for scheduling me directly after Professor Crown, one of the most preeminent physicians in our country, but hopefully I'm here with a colleague, Bernie Walsh. Both Bernie and I have been affected by cancer, and hopefully we'll give you a different dimension to the cancer story that you've just heard from Dr. Crown. So I'm here in particular to talk a little bit more about the financial implications of having cancer. I mean, when anybody is faced with a cancer diagnosis, the last thing you actually think about is, oh my God, how is this going to cause me stress in terms of additional bills, or how is it going to affect my earnings? But actually, the consequences of having cancer are massive for pretty much every patient who experiences a cancer journey. So I'll just give you a little bit of detail on that in today's presentation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the work of the Marie Keating Foundation. And as Paul said, we were very happy to partner with his company last year, who supported a comfort fund which helps us to provide financial assistance to cancer patients as they're on a cancer journey. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. So just 2 slides on the Marie Keating Foundation. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with us. We're a very small cancer organisation, 15 members of staff. We were founded just over 20 years ago now by Ronan Keating's family after his mum, Marie Keating, died from cancer at the age of 51. And the family found out afterwards that she actually had a very, very curable form of cancer. And had she just gone to the doctor earlier, she would be with us today. She would be alive today. So the family set up the foundation, and the key focus of our organisation is to raise awareness about the signs and symptoms of the main common cancers. So we have a team of nurses who travel around the country on 3 mobile units, going into schools, workplaces, community groups, educating people about the signs and symptoms of cancer. Because as we heard from Professor Crown, spotting cancer early is absolutely key, because even if you are diagnosed, if it's stage 0 or stage 1, you have a hell of a better chance of coming out the other side than if it's stage 3 or stage 4. So knowing how to spot cancer and also knowing how to reduce your risk is absolutely key. And that's one of the key focuses of the foundation. We run a range of cancer awareness campaigns. So for example, in November, it's Lung Cancer Awareness Month. In October, it's breast cancer. We run specific campaigns educating, again, people what symptoms to look out for. So at the moment, we're doing a bowel screening campaign in Galway, where our mobile unit is encouraging people to attend for bowel screening. And I'll just echo what Professor Crown said in relation to screening. I think, unfortunately, confidence in the cervical check, as well as bowel screening, as well as breast check, will have been understandably very much eroded this week or these past few weeks. But please attend for your screening. It is never 100% accurate, and it should never have been sold to people as being 100% accurate. In the case of cervical check, it's about 85%, but that's still a good test, and it's the best test you will have to set off the alarm bell. So whether it's bowel screen, whether it's prostate, whether it's cervical cancer or breast check, please go along and attend for your screening when you are invited. So sorry, I'll get off my podium now. Just to say, we're a tiny organisation. Our annual income is 1.4 million this year. We don't get a cent of government funding, so every single cent of that is fundraised. And 80% of that goes directly on our services. So we have put a huge emphasis on managing our funds and our donations very efficiently. We are very well governed. We have what's called the triple lock, which is the best governance shield it's the best practice and governance within the charity sector. And we have always published our accounts. They're externally audited every year. So we would encourage you, please go on to see how our funds have been raised and how they have been spent, because it's very important that people trust us fully as a charity organisation, because we are aware there have been issues in the past with some other charities, unfortunately, who have dragged the sector down. This is an example of our mobile unit. So as I said, we have 3 of those which can be invited into any workplace. For example, for any of you who have an occupational health scheme, if you'd like to invite our nurses to come in to you for a day, they can give talks about men's cancers, about women's cancers, about skin cancer during the summer. And they can do all our nurses are oncology trained or community health nurses, and they can give one-to-one consultations if you have any questions about cancer. We run a comfort fund, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. That is whereby we are supporting people who are going through a cancer journey and find themselves struggling financially as a result. And there are some really, really heart-wrenching stories of families who really find themselves in financial difficulty. And instead of being able to focus on their cancer and on getting themselves better, they have the massive stress of financial worries due to the fact that bills are coming in, and particularly if it's the income earner that is affected, they have the double whammy of earnings being reduced as well as additional expenses. So it can be a really, really difficult time for people. So we try to alleviate that. Not in a big way, unfortunately, it's a small fund, but it can make a difference at a very difficult time. So I'll tell you just a few examples of people we've been able to support over the years. We also have an Ask the Nurse service, so at any stage, anybody can send an email or call one of our nurses with a question about cancer. Again, it's free of charge, and our nurses will respond within 24 hours. And then, in view of the fact that more and more people are surviving cancer, and which is the wonderful thing, thanks to the huge advances that Professor Crown talked about in terms of the treatments and therapies that we're experiencing today, thankfully so many more people are coming out the other side of cancer, or living with cancer for much longer. But that cohort of people also maybe struggle sometimes psychologically, and they may struggle going back to work, or they may struggle with some side effects, of longer-term side effects of their cancer. So we run what we call survivorship programs. So they're 6-week workshop programs for cancer survivors or for people who are living with an ongoing diagnosis. And that they can, facilitate expertise in nutrition or on, psychological and emotional well-being. And we run those all around the country for cancer survivors. So that's just giving you a brief introduction to the foundation. Happy to talk to you, and I know some of you have visited our stand outside today, but if any of you have any questions, we'd be delighted to talk to you at any stage. So we already got an overview of kind of cancer trends in the US and internationally, and I suppose Ireland isn't hugely different in terms of that. Pretty much every year there are just under 40,000 invasive cancers diagnosed. Because people are living longer, because our population is growing, because people are detecting cancer earlier, actually that number is set to double by 2040, which is alarming to some extent, but at least we know while there are more cases being diagnosed, there will be fewer deaths from cancer by and large. So by 2020, it'll be 1 in 3 people will develop cancer in their lifetime. And the 4 key cancers, as we heard from Professor Crown, are breast cancer in women, prostate cancer in men, and then lung cancer and colorectal or bowel cancer in both male and female. But melanoma is increasing. There are approximately 20 different cancers, but the larger ones are breast, prostate, lung, and bowel. In terms of death in Ireland, there are actually 8,700 deaths per year, and that has risen by about 30%. And cancer is predicted to be the leading cause of death in Ireland. It'll jump the cardiovascular disease, which is currently the #1 reason for death in Ireland. And again, that's due to better education about the importance of lifestyle choices and, better treatments in terms of cardiovascular disease as well. And just to say that the National Cancer Strategy was launched formally last year, and that, in addition to putting huge amounts of funding into research, which is improving our treatments and therapies, that also has identified the importance of supporting cancer survivors after a cancer journey, but also on the importance of prevention of cancer in the first place. And that's where the Marie Keating Foundation will come in, because again, our message is all about early detection and early diagnosis and how you can actually reduce your risk. Like even just through lifestyle choices, 4 out of every 10 cancers can be prevented. So not smoking, being safe in the sun, as Dr. Crown mentioned, moderating your alcohol, doing lots of physical exercise, at least a half an hour a day or at least 5 days a week, and then diet and nutrition. So just those 5 lifestyle choices can reduce anybody's risk of developing cancer by a huge amount. So the next slide, I think we've had that fact before. 1 in 3 men will develop cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 women. As I said, mainly due to an increased population and people living longer. Some other facts and figures: new cases of invasive cancers per year. Again, more in male than in female, and the cumulative lifetime risk of developing cancer is higher among men than women. Also, in terms of your likelihood to die from cancer is higher among men than women, and the mortality rate, as you can see there, it's 204 for men and 149 for women. So again, that's just showing the types of cancer. So predominantly in men, it's prostate, lung, colorectal, and melanoma, and in female, it's breast cancer, lung, colorectal, and melanoma. But interestingly, as Dr. Crown said, more women, as of next year, more women in Ireland will die from lung cancer than from breast cancer, which is really a phenomenal statistic, given that there's a much stronger incidence or higher incidence of breast cancer. And that is largely due to the fact that women are not presenting till a later stage. And there's a lot of stigma associated with smoking, and people are kind of, trying to put off the fact that they maybe have a persistent cough or other symptoms. So whether you're a smoker or not, if you have any symptoms, our message is please go and get yourself checked, because if you present with lung cancer at stage 1 or stage 2, you'll be in the 20% survival rate. But unfortunately, far too many people are presenting at stage 3 and stage 4, and that's why the mortality rate of lung cancer is so much higher. Just in terms of some interesting statistics for the actuaries among you, just showing the projections of cancer incidence among the main types of cancer. So the upper cohort is for female and the lower ones are for male. So you can see that there's going to be huge increases in male cancers by 2040, so by 108% versus 81% in females. And again, it's you can see in lung cancer how the incidence is due to increase more, so by 121% in men and 95% in women. But the deaths from that type of cancer are going to increase even more. So the great news is the survivorship rates, and again, we're here to give a very positive message about the fact that more and more people are coming out the other side. So 10-year survival rate for prostate cancer, actually it's now gone up to 91%. This is based on 2014 figures, but in 2017 it was 91%. But you can see for lung cancer it's much lower, it's only 15%. And that's because people are presenting at a much later rate. For breast cancer, it's about 82% currently, but that's improving all the time. For testicular cancer, it's 96%. For melanoma, it's as much as 100%, provided it's caught at stage 1. If it's caught at stage 4, it's a lot less. It's actually as low as 56%. So just to say to you, skin cancer, as Dr. Crown said, is the fastest growing cancer for men and women. Melanoma is something you don't want to have. I had a malignant melanoma back in 2006. I was told by my doctor if I had not presented to them that my leg would have had to be amputated within 6 weeks, and if I had waited for 6 months, I wouldn't be here today. So melanoma spreads very quickly. You need to be checking your moles. Please do not use sunbeds. One use of a sunbed can increase your risk of developing melanoma by 20%. One bad sunburn as a child or as a young adult can increase your risk of developing melanoma by 50%. So please, please use the factor 50, wear hats, go under umbrellas. As we have the skin type that is very prone to developing skin cancer, so please be careful in the sun, and please avoid the sunbeds. So sorry, I'll get off my pod again. So just some research that has been carried out. It was commissioned by the Irish Cancer Society back in 2015, and it was carried out by Millard Brown, and it was looking specifically at the financial implications of a cancer journey. So it was conducted during the summer of 2015, and it was really to just see, well, what are those additional costs that we've been hearing about, when people are going through a cancer journey, and then how does cancer actually impact on your earning power? So it was done both with focus groups of cancer patients and their carers, and it was also done with an e-questionnaire. Both male and female participants, about 409 patients and carers took part. And some of the statistics in it were actually quite startling. So essentially the bottom line there says that every month that you're on a cancer journey, cancer patients are experiencing additional costs, and I mentioned the word additional, of $862 per month. And that goes up as high as $1,200 per month. So those additional costs are medical expenses, which are things like extra medication. Yes, you're on the drug purchase scheme, but most cancer patients, I know when I had breast cancer, I was on about 12 you're on different drugs to manage the side effects of your chemo. You're on steroids, you're on tamoxifen, you're on a range of different drugs. So yes, you're even if you're on the drug purchase scheme, you still have additional medications to contend with. That could be the cost of the physio. For example, if you have lymphedema in your arm, you need to attend for physio sessions. If you don't have health insurance, they are additional costs. Costs during treatment could be travel to and from. If you're based down in Wexford, you might have to come up to or Waterford, you may have to come up to Dublin for your treatment. There are only 8 cancer centres and hospitals where treatment is given in Ireland. So if you're unlucky to live in Letterkenny, you might have to travel, to Galway for your treatment. So the travel expenses are a lot. While you're away, you may have childcare expenses. When you get to the hospital, you may have car parking fees, which I think is the biggest travesty. There's no reduction for patients as they're attending for treatment. And if you're going for your chemo, you're there for the whole day. So those expenses really build up. You could have one-off purchases like wigs, for example. I know you get one wig under the medical or your the health insurance scheme, which is paid. But I didn't like the first wig I got, so I wanted to buy a second one. Sorry, you had to pay for it yourself, so that's another €350. Things like skin creams, you have to be very careful what, you can't use any toxic creams or creams that may have any toxins in them, so you have to pay for these expensive creams that you buy on the internet. So as somebody who wouldn't have had cancer, you would never even think about things like that, but believe me, there are a lot of extra costs. In terms of then the impact on income, so most people, if you're the income earner in your family, most people, while you're going through your cancer journey, depending on your treatment, will not be in a position to work. Some people, depending on their diagnosis and their treatment path, they may be in a position to work part-time or maybe on a reduced hours basis. But for the vast majority of people, your income is affected. So in my case, when I had worked all my life in financial services, by the way, and then I jumped into the charity sector. And when I got my diagnosis, I was off work for 9 months. So I was lucky enough that the company I was working with had a scheme whereby I was paid 3/4 of my salary for 6 months. But then, after 6 months, I was paid nothing. So I had to go from 3/4 of my salary to social welfare, which is €188 a week. And I had 3 kids in secondary school and college. I was very lucky, my husband was working, so we got by. But imagine if you were the only income earner in your family and suddenly you can't work, you're getting 188 a week, the bills are still coming in. So you can just imagine how that additional stress and worry does not contribute to you getting physically better. So I'm just making the point, I can't underestimate the financial stress that how it impacts on cancer patients. And you can see from the statistics there of how people, 64% had to change their working hours or practices or stop work, reduce their working hours, and obviously that has a massive impact on their income. So in terms of the supports that people have, you automatically assume everybody with cancer has a medical card. That's not the case. I didn't qualify for one. So you can see there, 3 in 5 patients had a medical card. Half received one following diagnosis. Some people weren't successful in getting it. 57% of people had medical insurance, private health insurance. So that means you do get, for example, when you're going to your oncologist, you're charged, you have to pay up front your consultant's fee, and then you can claim it back from your health insurance. But you don't get 100%, you still have to pay a certain part. And if you're attending for occupational therapist or physio, those costs also add up. So just in terms of income protection, and I know, like Bertie and I were talking as we were coming down today, neither of us had income protection. Both of us had life assurance, but neither of us really remembered anybody talking to us about critical illness or, and in fact, I'm working with Marie Keating Foundation 4 years, and I've only come across one patient who openly said that she had income protection. So I definitely think it's something that needs to be stressed more with younger people, because both of us kind of felt, oh my God, if we had that, things would have been so much easier, no matter what your circumstances. I was one of the stupid people who innocently tried to get it after I had come through my treatment. And I mean, I won't forget the day when the insurance broker openly laughed at me and he said, but you've had cancer. No way. Not at least for 5 years or probably for 10 years. So I learned my lesson then, but I wish I had known that beforehand. So I just will say that in terms of when you're talking to people, by all means use our stories. We'll happily, talk about the importance of that, the preventative and the protective message of, anyway, I think that's very clear, and I think Bernie will probably echo that as well in terms of her experience. So just on the wider impact on family life, I mean, when you're already struggling, trying to feel well and putting on a brave face, the last thing you need is not to be able to treat your kids, to bring them to the cinema, or not to be able to afford to send them on a holiday camp or something. So it has a huge and massive impact on family life. And 2/3 of the people who participated in this survey put it on 7 to 10, like it was the biggest thing that they really felt impacted on their journey. So in light of all that, one of the things the foundation does, as I mentioned earlier, is we give out small grants to families who are really in need of assistance during their cancer treatment. And that's called our Comfort Fund. So we try to give some kind of comfort. Last year we gave out 531 grants, so we helped 531 families. So essentially, patients who are going through their treatment apply through their medical social workers in the cancer hospitals. The application forms come to us, we assess them. We very rarely turn people down, but unfortunately we can only give one grant. So if people have an ongoing or are living for longer, we can't help them on an ongoing basis. As I said, it's a small fund. It's covering those fuel costs. If somebody's going through chemo treatment, they're cold a lot, so you need to have your heating on a lot. Childcare bills, medication bills. There isn't any other similar fund in Ireland, which is so unfortunate, and that's something we really want to shout to the rooftops. And the Irish Cancer Society did have another fund, but unfortunately just under 2 years ago they had to divert their funding away from that towards other services. So within 1 month we saw a 338% increase in the number of applications on our fund, because the demand is still out there, and as more and more people are developing cancer, more and more people are feeling the financial impact. We used to give out €1,000 per grant. We've had to reduce that now to, we still give out some for 1,000, but some we only give 300. And you kind of feel so guilty just giving 300, but I suppose it's better than nothing, and we try to help everybody who applies. But we would just love to be able to give more. So just to give you a couple of stories of 3 patients, and we've given them different names, because again, it's not something people like to talk about, that they have to apply to our fund. People feel shameful, but they shouldn't. There's no shame. It's unfortunately a consequence of a cancer journey, and we want to help them with that. But just to show you, one is a young boy who had testicular cancer. He had a large family, and one of his sisters unfortunately had special needs. His mum was a full-time carer, and his dad wasn't working, and they basically had lots of bills mounting up. And they were brought to our attention at the foundation by the medical social worker when Luke didn't attend for 2 of his radiation appointments. And that was because the mother couldn't leave the other younger kids because she had no one to mind the children. And that's just an example of where, poor Luke was not getting his treatment because the family couldn't pay for him to be brought to hospital. So we gave them a grant of €1,000, and the medical social worker is working with that family now, and there are other supports. There's counselling for the family been put in place. But that's just one example. Jimmy Kremen is a guy he's actually in our annual report, and he has spoken about his case openly on radio and in front of other audiences. He's a young guy from Cork. He developed Hodgkin's lymphoma. he was travelling to and from, I think it was from Carrigaline into Cork City, but he basically, he had to stop work and he had no money coming in, and he applied for funding to basically pay for the insurance on his car, because if he was going on the buses or if he was going by train, he would, with lymphoma you're open to infection, and you have, so essentially by being able to pay for his insurance in the car, that gave him his independence, and it ensured that he wasn't open to infections, and it just gave him that freedom as well. So he was saying, like, I think we only gave him €600, but it made a big difference at an important time for him. And just finally then Kate had a brain tumour which had spread to her lungs. She had 3 children. Her husband had to take leave off work because Kate basically really needed him to care for her. The family urgently needed to pay for childcare so that she could be accompanied to hospital, and we ended up giving them €1,000. So that's just 3 cases of how a small amount of money can go a very long way. And I really want to say thank you to Paul, because through the partnership, Paul was able to give us, it was just over 10,000, I think it was 11.5, but we were able to help about 20 families in a really significant way. And I think we actually wrote to each of those people to say, look, because of the partnership with PACS, we've been able to help you. And everybody is so appreciative. So behind every single one of those 500 odd applications we get, there's a similar story. And we would love if people weren't in that place, or if people did have the income protection in the first place, they wouldn't be so badly affected. But thank you again for your support. And I know there's some envelope going around, and anything you can give towards us will go towards this Comfort Fund. And just to say thank you so much. If any of you need to avail of our services or have any colleagues or friends or family members, please just get in touch with us and we'll be delighted to support you. So thank you very much for that. And now I'd just like to introduce a really good friend, Bernie Walsh, who was diagnosed around the same time as I was back in the autumn of 2012. And Bernie and I have done the Camino with the foundation a couple of times. We're going again in September, by the way, if any of you are interested in joining us. But Bernie has her own story to tell, so I'll let her introduce you herself, but she's going to tell you a little bit, as a survivor herself, how having cancer has affected her too. Thank you.